everyone, welcome to the Psychology Virtual Open Evening. If you're thinking about studying psychology, this PowerPoint will give you the key information that you'll need to make your decision. It should also answer any questions that you have. I'm Miss Wilkins and I will be your teacher for psychology. I've been teaching this subject for just over 8 years. One of the most common questions I'm asked when students attend open evenings is, what is psychology? The definition of this subject is psychology is the science of human behaviour, thinking and experiences. So if you click on the next slide, that will take you through this definition in more detail. Here's some additional information to expand on the points that were made on the previous slide about the definition of what is psychology. So the definition is psychology is the science of human behaviour, thinking and experiences. So the term science will refer to the objective study of something based on evidence. This means that researchers will not allow their personal opinions to influence the outcome of the study or to influence the write-up of their report. Psychologists will study behaviour. They are interested in what people and animals do. Sometimes it's not possible to study humans in research, and therefore researchers might choose certain animals to be part of their study. What they would then try to do is look at what the findings are from that study to generalise them or apply them to people. Psychologists are also interested in experiences and thinking. So if we really want to understand behaviour and what people are doing and why they are doing it, we need to also understand their thoughts and their feelings. So we need to understand the thought processes behind that behaviour and how that behaviour made them feel. At the start of the AS Psychology course, we will cover Unit 1, Psychology Past to Present. This particular unit focuses on the approaches in psychology. There are 5 main approaches that we will consider: the biological approach, the behaviourist approach, the psychodynamic approach, the cognitive approach, and the positive approach. Each of these approaches have different views on what influences human behaviour. Now in this particular PowerPoint, we will be exploring the biological, psychodynamic and cognitive approaches. Let's take a look at the first approach. This is called the biological approach and focuses on bodily processes. So a biological psychologist would believe that 3 things influence human behaviour. The first being evolutionary influences. This means that the genes that you've inherited from your ancestors shape and determine your behaviour. The second aspect is brain structure and function. This means that the way your brain is structured and the functions of the different areas of your brain influence your behaviour. So the frontal lobe is involved in speech production. So if somebody was to experience damage at the frontal part of their brain, this could explain why they experience speech loss. Also, the occipital lobe, this is at the back of the brain. This is involved in sight. So if somebody was to experience damage to that part of the brain, they might lose their sight. The third aspect that biological psychologists focus on would be neurotransmitters or neurochemicals within the brain which send messages around the brain. For example, serotonin. If somebody was to experience very low levels of serotonin, serotonin is involved in mood, this could explain why somebody develops depression. When exploring the approaches, in addition to looking into the reasons why people do what they do and the causes of certain behaviours, we will also be looking at therapies. Now, the therapy that we will look at within the biological approach is something called psychosurgery. So psychosurgery is a surgical operation which will aim to alter, damage or deactivate certain parts of the brain in order to treat unwanted behaviour. So we will look at one therapy per approach, and each therapy will aim to treat a mental health disorder. Now, the quite explicit and gruesome picture you've got on the PowerPoint slide is a particular type of psychosurgery called a transorbital lobotomy. Now, like I've previously mentioned, because the biological approach believes that your bodily processes influence your behaviour, that is why psychosurgery was developed, with the aim to physically change your bodily processes. In this instance, it would be brain structure, function, and neurotransmitter levels. So the transorbital lobotomy was developed by somebody called Dr. Walter Freeman. It was used in the late 1940s, throughout the 50s and the 60s. Now, this particular lobotomy involved an electroconvulsive shock which would render the individual unconscious for a matter of minutes. Dr. Walter Freeman and his colleagues would then use an ice pick-like tool to insert the ice pick underneath the eyelid, above the eyeball, into the eye socket, and they would then use a small hammer which would be tapped on the ice pick to break through the skull and into the frontal part of the brain. Now, it was believed at this time that the frontal part of the brain was involved in mood control. Now, they were correct, but there were no brain scanning techniques around at that time to be able to confirm this. And as I've mentioned on previous slides, the frontal part of the brain is also involved with speech production. So what they would do is they would move the ice pick-like tool from side to side, which would damage connections in the frontal part of the brain, and then they would remove the ice pick-like tool. The person then would regain consciousness. They would obviously have very bruised eyes, but they would leave the doctor's surgery within a couple of hours. So they would be classed as like an outpatient. They would come in, have the transorbital lobotomy, and would then leave maybe a few hours later. So very controversial, it seems unethical now to talk about this type of surgery. It was used on prisoners. It was used on individuals who were in mental asylums. We call them mental health institutions nowadays. Sometimes it was used without the consent of the person, which is obviously, even more unethical. It was used on very, very young children nowadays who might be diagnosed as having something like ADHD. Housewives would have this done if they were bored with their lives, bored with the sort of daily routines they'd have to go through day to day. So it was needlessly used as well. So it was used on individuals that didn't really need this particular transorbital lobotomy. And then we show students how psychosurgery has developed. So psychosurgery is still used today, but it's something called stereotactic psychosurgery, where surgeons will use brain scanning techniques to pinpoint the exact and specific regions of the brain that need altering. We've even got something called deep brain stimulation, which doesn't actually damage any part of the brain. It just almost switches that certain area off, deactivates that part of the brain. So that's, a lot more safe than, the previous techniques that would have been irreversible, because much earlier techniques can obviously cause lots of side effects as well. So the person their mood might have changed, but then other things could develop as well, like they might lose the ability to speak, or they might experience something called the flat effect, where they don't experience any human emotions anymore. So it's a very interesting therapy to look into how it's developed, and students typically really enjoy those lessons, mainly because we get to show students some of the original footage of these as well. So if you don't like watching footage where you can see ice picks going into the eye socket, that's typically when students will look away or will leave the classroom. But it is very interesting to watch this footage. The cognitive approach focuses on our internal mental processes, for example, our perception, and how these processes are influenced by our experiences and expectations. So a cognitive psychologist is very interested in thinking. So how your thinking influences your emotions, and how your emotions influence your behaviour. So why you do the things that you do. One of the things that we look at within the cognitive approach, which students typically really enjoy, is something called cognitive distortions. Cognitive distortions literally distort or change your reality so that you can see or hear things differently from other people. And you've got two really common examples on the PowerPoint slide. The first one is a YouTube clip, which you can watch in your own time as well if you'd like to. You might have heard it before. It's the clip where there's a sound, and that sound either sounds like the word brainstorm or the words green needle. And within lessons, we'll talk about which students hear brainstorm, which students hear green needle, and we'll try to retrain your mind so that you hear the different word instead. There was another one going around as well with the Yanni and Laurel. The other image is the image of the dress. Now the dress is actually black and blue, but some people saw it as white and gold. And you might see it as white and gold today as well. Now this all depends on your individual sensitivity to colour, as well as what screen you're using to look at this image, and where you are in your house right now, or wherever you are looking at this PowerPoint presentation. So for example, if you're near a window and you've got lots of natural light coming in, maybe the sky is blue as well, that might influence you to see the colours as white and gold. Whereas if you're in an artificially lit room, you'll typically see the dress as black and blue. You can also be influenced by the brightness of the device that you're using. If you're on your mobile phone, is your brightness right up or is it all the way down? Again, we'll discuss this in a lot more detail when you guys start the psychology course. The psychodynamic approach focuses on the effects of early childhood experiences on our later personality. Freud was the individual that developed this approach, and he also focuses on your unconscious mind. Now, Freud believes that you don't know the thoughts and desires of your unconscious mind, but you can find them out by analysing your dreams, and that's something that we do in AS psychology. You guys will fill out a dream diary where you record the dreams that you've had over a period of a week, or you can discuss recurring dreams that you remember having as a child. Then in class we'll discuss them and we'll analyse them to give you the true meaning or the real meaning of that dream. If you really enjoy AS psychology and you choose to continue your studies onto A2 psychology, these are some of the areas that we will be looking into. Autistic spectrum behaviours, schizophrenia, and criminal behaviours. So think of your AS year as your chance to build a foundation of knowledge to help you when you move on to the A2 psychology year, when we look at some really interesting topics and behaviours within psychology. There are are two exam papers at the end of the AS Psychology year, which are both sat in May. Unit 1 is called Psychology Past to Present. This is worth 50% of the AS level marks. The paper is 1 hour and 30 minutes long, and the students will be answering short essay questions. So this paper covers the 5 approaches, some of which we've discussed on the previous slides. Unit 2 is called Psychological Concepts. This is worth 50% of the AS level marks. The paper is also 1 hour and 30 minutes long, and there are 2 sections to this exam paper. Section A is called Contemporary Debates. So what we'll be looking at here is one debate for each of the approaches that we've considered. So we look at one debate from the biological approach, one debate from the cognitive approach, one debate from the psychodynamic approach, etc. So some of the debates can look at things like the mother being the primary caregiver. So we'll consider things like, does the mother have to be the primary caregiver? Does a child even need a primary caregiver? Or could they have multiple caregivers, each offering different types of support for the child? So those are the types of things that we'll be debating and considering within lessons. And again, like I've mentioned, there'll be one debate for each of the approaches that we've looked at. Section B is called Research Methods. So here you'll be looking at the steps that a psychological researcher would take when they're carrying out a piece of research. So starting from the beginning, when they look at what their research question is, what their aim is, what variables they're going to study, what their hypothesis is, working all the way through the different stages of the investigation, all the way to the end, where they're calculating their results, analysing their findings, evaluating their piece of research. Within this, we'll also look at 2 additional studies, one by somebody called Milgram and another by somebody called Kohlberg. So we'll be investigating those studies from a research methods perspective, so looking into the research methods those researchers used. You will be assessed twice every half term. So for example, you will complete 2 formal assessments before October half term, and then 2 formal assessments before the Christmas holiday. These formal assessments will reflect exam questions. So you will be completing past paper questions or potential exam style questions in order for you to be completely prepared for the examinations. For every topic that we study within psychology, you will always be provided with a work booklet, which will include all of the information and activities that you will need in order to prepare for the exams. Each booklet is devised so that over the course of the AS Psychology year, you will be completely prepared for the external examinations, so you will not be required to buy textbooks for this course. As I've mentioned on the previous slide, for each topic that we will look at within psychology, you will always be presented with a structured work booklet, which will involve all of the content that you will need to be able to achieve a really good grade in the external exams. And as psychology is a brand new subject for many students, you'll probably notice that a lot of the lessons within the AS course involve new key terms and words that you will need to understand. In addition to this, you guys will get involved in discussions about how the content we are looking at applies to a real life situation. You'll start to evaluate your ideas, so within the class we'll be discussing, do you agree or do you disagree with one another? Of course, we'll do lots of exam practice so that you feel completely comfortable with the external exams. And you'll be watching lots of documentaries, lots of YouTube clips, sometimes films as well, so that you guys thoroughly understand the behaviour that we're looking into. So if you take criminal behaviour, for example, one area we'll focus on is what determines a psychopath. So what's the definition of a psychopath? We'll watch lots of documentary footage, lots of YouTube clips about this, and we'll try to explain this from a real world perspective. So we look at real life case studies to understand forensic psychology and criminal behaviour. In order to study psychology at A level, you will need to achieve a C grade in a science subject for GCSE, a C grade in maths GCSE, and a C in English Lit or Lang is recommended at GCSE. Thank you very much for watching and listening to this PowerPoint presentation. If you have any further questions, please feel free to email me on one of the email addresses on the PowerPoint slide.